When I was much younger, I was an avid outdoorsman and a hunter, primarily hunting bear. It's a passion of mine that I loved. I used to hunt black bear mainly, although I had gone grizzly hunting a few times here and there with my cousins up in Alaska. I was on a crazy outdoor trek about a few years ago, fell off a small 30-foot incline and shattered both of my legs. Had I fallen any other way, I would have basically been toast. Thank you, Lord, for that. But that's not why I'm writing to you. When I used to bear hunt, I used to encounter all sorts of beasts being out in the wild. I was born in the city and spent a lot of my time there in my life, and I did not get a hand at taming the wild till I was later in my teens and befriended those who made this way of life. They taught me a lot in a very short amount of time, and I do owe a lot to them. Not only have I encountered Dogman on multiple occasions, but also Bigfoots as well. Both are beasts in their own right, and you want to respect and be very careful of. Both can easily kill you if you're not careful. That's why you need to be respectful to the things around you when you're out there. I mean, I have had instances where I was out tracking this big black bear one time, and I came across these bigger, larger-than-life canine tracks in the soft dirt. This was after I had seen one already, so I didn't take long to figure out what these tracks belonged to. The stride on these tracks, though, had to have been 5 feet easily. Massive prints, bigger than the size of my hand. They went on for maybe 40 yards and disappeared into the thick forest. The most haunting detail that gets me every time is that the prints looked bipedal and not quadrupedal. I knew what it belonged to, but I didn't want to acknowledge these things. I've since come to terms with them and them living around where I hunted later on, but at that time it was a tough pill to swallow, even more so than Bigfoot. At least Bigfoot, there's some sort of introduction to its existence with the powder film and just basic general knowledge of Bigfoot in modern-day pop culture. I had never heard of a Dogman at the time, the first one that I saw one. That's why I had a much harder time dealing with it. My first encounter with these things was 2 years after that previous story. I was hunting black bears again, and I had caught the tracks of this one black bear. These tracks led me a little further in the direction of these mountains. I wasn't totally familiar with them, but I didn't think too much of it. After a little ways in, I had these 2 large, werewolf-looking creatures stalking me from further back up in the trees. Scared the hell out of me. I wasn't going to keep following those bear tracks anymore. I got out of there, and quick. I had no idea what kind of animals I was dealing with, and I wasn't about to be ignorant at the time. You have to understand that these things were huge. At first, they looked like 2 wild dogs, the size of horses, darting back and forth between the trees. Then, I saw both of them stand up on 2 legs. Turned me whiter than a ghost. I would continue to run into these same 2 Dogmen in the years to come. That's for another day, though. The next encounter was about 5 months later, when I was out hiking in that part of the woods again, and felt the same feelings as last time, but much more intense. I checked my surroundings, and the scariest thing was that I remembered and recognized the feeling. I just couldn't see them anywhere. That told me that they were already almost up on me, or about to be. I got out of there, not waiting around to find out. I had completely forgotten all about last time until I felt that despicable feeling once again. The memories came flooding right back at the time. That's how I knew. I had a couple of encounters with Bigfoot too, in the very same area, but I never saw any of them at the same time. My Bigfoot encounters were similar, but not aggressive in any way, not like these things. I believe that Bigfoot are much more docile, curious creatures. Not the Dogmen, though. I believe they are all full of ill intent, and their auras are so much darker. I believe they were trying to drive me out of their den or territory, whatever it was that I must have come into. It was always that same general area in the mountains every time I would encounter them. I had ventured off into that same area of the mountains more often than not afterwards, and not always had those ominous experiences. I was always equipped with at least a machete and a Glock 45 going back there, just in case anything happened. There's a big river if you travel back far enough. It's quite the scene, but I stopped going back in there after a while. Another time was going back in the mountain range, and I'm pretty sure I ended up sneaking up on one of those things. Came across a large clearing with a large boulder about the size of a small house off of about 200 yards away. Crouching on the top, clear as day, was one of those dog creatures I had seen previous. It was clear daytime, and it was no mistaking what it was by its shape. It was not a bear. It was clearly canine by the head and upper body. I could see that it was fixated heavily on something moving off in the trees that I couldn't see. It wasn't moving much either, so I sat there and watched it for moments before moving on in the opposite direction. It was summer in 2011. I was exploring with a friend. I had lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and this friend of mine lived down in Central Oregon, out in the middle of nowhere, where there's dilapidated buildings, lots of desolate farmland. Not much out there, really. Took a trip out to his place and got bored pretty quickly. We wanted to go out exploring and check out everything around, but some of the old homesteads in the area weren't exactly safe. But that's what draws us to it. My friend hadn't actually explored the area much beyond what our eyes would show around his house. I thought this would have been the perfect evening to go wandering out in the middle of nowhere with a joint and just two guys out on an adventure. Well, I ended up forgetting the joint in my car, so we just went without. We went a few miles away from his house to several different old homesteads, all dilapidated, worn down, hadn't been used in years. Nothing but desolate farmland around. This was in the summer, so it was arid, dry, and hot. We checked out 3 homesteads that weren't far apart in the same area. We loved the character of each one. In fact, my friend, being the photography buff he is, brought out his camera, and we did some really sick portfolio shots. Anyway, we saw this huge rundown barn next to a corn mill off in the distance. Further away from his house than we already were, we decided to end the adventure after going down there and taking some cool portrait shots. As we approached this old barn, this place was truly massive. We walked around and tried to get some really good shots, but my friend noticed his camera was really acting up all of a sudden. Both of our phones were too. Not turning on, showing we had a dead battery when both had been nearly fully charged before we even left. Things like that. It was strange. I should probably mention how bad the smell was in this barn. Not only was it an old, musty old barn, but it reeked like wet dog. It was terrible. I think after hanging around for maybe 20 minutes, my friend mentioned to me we should cut things short and head back. I don't think he was feeling well. He told me he started feeling really run down all of a sudden, and just didn't feel good. My stomach felt knotted up, and my hairs were standing on end, but I wasn't quite sure why. We left and walked out 2 hours back to his house. Even halfway back to his house, he was telling me he wasn't feeling ill anymore, and we talked about it much more when we got back. He seemed confused at the reason why both of us felt so strange in that barn, not to mention his camera and our devices that kept turning off and acting like they were dying. It was truly strange. I told him it could have been one of the spots on the earth, where there's those magnetic shifts, kind of like the Bermuda Triangle, but I have absolutely no idea. I know this used to be a heavy native territory hundreds of years ago, but that's it. Nothing else really interesting happened during the rest of the visit, but that always sticks out to me for some weird reason. When I was a child, about 10 years old, I used to go huckleberry picking with my grandparents. It was an experience that I greatly cherished, and I did that for years. One summer, it was a very hot August day where we went up into northern Idaho and picked a huge batch of huckleberries. My grandparents were picking berries, and I ran off into another spot on the other side of the trail we were on to pick more huckleberries. I grabbed my basket, and I start rotating between stuffing my face with berries and putting them in the basket. I hear this loud crack not far away from me at about my 8 o'clock, and turn around in reaction to the loud crack. I froze and dropped my berry basket, covering my mouth so I didn't scream. I can't judge feet well, so I'm gonna say it was probably 50 feet away from me. There, in the trees, was this really scary looking, shaggy dog on 2 legs, holding down this lower thick branch like it was plotting to sneak over this branch and get to me. When I turned to see it, it had an expression on its face like, "Oh shit, I've been caught," kind of look. It had the most intense eyes and stare I've ever seen on a person or an animal. Even at 10 years old, I knew what I was staring at was not an animal. It had too much intelligence in its eyes. It had intent and expression. It was very scary. I thought the way it looked was equally as scary. It was so much bigger than me. It would have dwarfed me had it been next to me. I mean, if this thing wanted to swoop in and grab me and take me away, like it was probably planning to do, it could have done so easily. Sometimes I'll think back about that branch not making the breaking snap sound that it did, and had it not, I think I would have probably been eaten by this thing. I was a skinny, small little scrawny kid, so I'm sure this thing saw me as the perfect grab-and-go kind of meal. It quickly retracted back into the trees after staring me in the eyes for a second, and I took that opportunity to run back to my grandparents, crying, telling them exactly what I saw. My grandparents were great people, and both were versed in the wild enough that they each had their own Bigfoot experiences. When I told them about what I saw, they believed me and comforted me. I'm glad because so many grandparents or parents would have just written a kid off who had seen something like that. We left the area immediately with my grandparents praying over me. But speaking of my grandmother was known in our community for her wonderful huckleberry pies. They were something from another world. They were so good. Secret recipe that had been passed down in our family. Every August, we'd go up into the mountains of Washington, Oregon, or even Idaho and harvest a large batch. I always loved eating them. So good. Hello, my name is Richard, and I'm a cryptid researcher. I've been doing this for the past 12 years now, and I'm trying to branch out in the community and share more of my experiences and stories from many eyewitnesses I've interviewed and talked to. I'm always out digging and trying to gather and collect more information. I have a ton of Dogman stories to share with you from eyewitnesses that I've spoken to over the years. I haven't really shared much of these because I truly felt that I just hadn't found the right YouTuber or person to release them through quite yet. I think you'll do better with some of these stories than others will. One of the more recent stories I wanted to share with you was when I interviewed this older gentleman who had lived and resided in West Virginia all of his life. He was a native, but I can't remember the tribe that he belonged to. He told me a story of how one of these dog beasts of the swamp came and took his brother when they were both very young. This older gentleman was in his 70s, and his brother was only 3 years younger than him. He was 12 at the time, and his younger brother was 9. He was out playing in the woods when the beast, as this older man describes, came out of the woods and grabbed onto his brother and carried him away deeper into the forest. This man immediately told his family, and the family told the elders about the boy being grabbed. They sent some of their own men of the tribe to go into the deep part of the woods to track down his brother, but they never found any trace of him. They gave up hope after a few days, knowing that he was probably gone for good. He never did come back, and that's something that has changed him forever, even as a younger boy. From my own research, I haven't came across anything along the lines of anyone being captured or kidnapped or taken by these things, but who's to say that can't be a thing? This older man showed me some of the relics and totems their tribe used to ward these beings and other foul spirits away. He recited me some prayers that he grew up praying with to keep his tribe and family safe. He did not have much to say about other matters, like what this beast looked like exactly when it happened. I could tell it was still hard for him to talk about, so I didn't press the issue too much. The one takeaway I got from this gentleman was that his tribe had numerous run-ins with these beasts, stealing supplies and children from their villages. His brother was not the first or only young child to be taken by these same creatures. I've noticed other similar patterns in behavior by the Sasquatch in Northern California. The local tribes of the land refer to a Sasquatch as mountain devils, and they would come into these villages during the night and kidnap children and women. So to hear almost the same thing is happening on the opposite end of the coast by a completely different cryptid is simply fascinating. It tells us these creatures truly do act in a similar way, and maybe they are tied together in one way or another. As you'll know, Bigfoot and Dogman don't like each other for some reason. There always seems to be situations where Bigfoot will come into an area that Dogman aren't, and as soon as Dogmen arrive in the area, the Bigfoot will be gone. There are a few tales passed down if you get a chance to talk to the right tribesmen about these beings fighting. There was a scarce amount of written record of this happening for certain villages. I believe these beings fought over territory. That's my conclusion, at least. The fellow in which I've been speaking about told me it's because they were fighting over food supply between children, deer, and all other wildlife out in the swamp and surrounding lands. It all provided ample food and cover for these cryptids. This being, or these beings, were known about long before his brother was ever taken, and even he knew about it, but had never actually seen one in the flesh. He knew many people in his tribe, and still do, that have had multiple run-ins with these things. Mostly in the swamp, that's where they like to hunt and live, he had told me. Even his grandfather and the village elders when he was a boy had forewarned about the beasts and shared their own tales of encountering both beasts fighting or just running into one another. It was when they would go out to hunt to seek food. Sometimes the Dogman would learn the behaviors of the villagers when they had soldiers patrolling to know when to sneak in and not be seen. These are very intelligent beings, and even he agreed with me on that. They are not to be underestimated. That's why when you're outside of the village getting supplies, wood, water, or anything and you're by yourself, you need to be aware of where you are and where you were going. There were just certain spots you wouldn't go to or visit because you could feel their presence around you, and you knew you didn't have long, or else you would be taken too. There were many of these areas, but mostly a mile or more out into the swamp. They had lost several of their own village people from those who had wandered too far out in the name of exploration or supplies, and never returned. These things thrive in the swamps from what I've gathered, which to me is surprising because there are so many Dogman encounters that happen in places that aren't necessarily swampy, or are far more desert-like. I guess Dogman can really be found anywhere, from dense lush forests to suburban areas, as we've all seen and heard encounters there, even swamps. This email could go on forever, so I'll stop and just share this one story with you for now. I'll be sending you many more for you and your audience to enjoy. Thanks. I wanted to write to you because what I believe is that I had an encounter with a werewolf. I have no idea what else to call this thing that I saw. My dog sure reacted funny to it too, and my dog is a very well-behaved animal. It happened when I would go on evening runs with my dog in the summertime, since it starts to really cool down in the evening. It was really a night just like any other night where I ran my dog, headphones in and all. I don't run anywhere sketchy, just around my neighborhood. There are lots of trees, but no forests or anything. You're a pretty standard run-of-the-mill kind of neighborhood. I first noticed things were off because my dogs, well, they started acting strange. She began cowering at points throughout the run, and stopped to where I'd have to tug on her leash to get her to go. I thought the whole thing was so strange. Then as we're coming around the curve in the sidewalk, this werewolf steps out behind us. I'm running forward, hear something heavy step out from behind me, and I turn my head. My dog is already going crazy, and there's just this thing standing there. It was clear as day that you had somebody who was 8 feet tall get into a high-quality, ultra-realistic werewolf costume. It just stood there, out in the open, watching me run. I was in such shock. I knew it wasn't somebody in a costume. It felt real. It looked real. My mind just went blank because I couldn't fathom such an animal to be in the flesh, only 10 feet behind me. My legs didn't stop moving though. I kept on running, even though I'm somehow dragging my dog with me. Time itself slowed down, and I think I might have even blacked out a lot of it. It's like I got PTSD from it or something. I must have kept running, but my head turned, keeping a close eye on this thing. A mix between, what the fuck is that, and oh my god, is this even real? It never moved. It never tried to reach out and grab me or even touch me. It easily could have. It was within arm's reach of me, and it just stopped, and I ran until it was out of sight. I cut the run short, got home, and went on full house lockdown for 3 days after that. My dog wouldn't stop shaking and acting strange. And the next weeks, after I had horrible nightmares about this thing being outside my house and coming in to get me. I kept it at bay for only so long, but it didn't fully stop. It was all just really creepy. I didn't run for almost a month after the initial encounter. When I started again, I never ran the same route I did on that one evening where I ran into the creature. About 28 years ago, I knew an Apache woman who attended the same congregation I did, who told me about a pack of werewolves that she saw when she was a little girl on a Native American reservation in Arizona. She was a really nice person, a devout follower of Jesus, very honest, so her story was very credible to me. Here is what happened. One day, she went with her father to go visit another town on the res that was a few hours away. She said that because they had left late in the day, he decided they would stay in town for the night, since it was getting dark and he didn't want to drive at night. So, he made a warm, comfortable bed for her in the bed of their pickup truck with some blankets they had in the truck. She said at some point, early in the morning, around 3 a.m., she woke up to hear shuffling, grunting, and growling near the truck. She said from where she was, under all the blankets, she could see them. A group of werewolves that were between 7 and 8 feet tall, covered with hair. She said they looked like the werewolf from the movie The Howling. Growing up on the res, she had heard the stories of Native American shamans who could shapeshift into these hideous creatures by opening themselves up to evil spirits. But now, in shock and terror, she was looking at them. She said she doesn't know if they were unaware that she was in the bed of the truck, or if they knew, but ignored her, but since she didn't move a muscle until they were gone. Many years reflecting on it, she was convinced that either way, the reason they didn't snatch her was that God was protecting her from them. My girlfriend and I have been spending the last couple of summers in my parents' old stone house, which happens to be in the middle of the woods, but somehow equipped with all what one would need for a comfortable lifestyle. To give a little bit of an overview of what it's like on the inside, there is a front entrance leading up to a large living area, equipped with a bar and many other means of luxury, such as a cinema screen and a massive freezer for snacks and such. Then to the right, there are stairs leading to the main bedrooms, and to the left, there is a massive sliding glass door leading to the backyard and out into some more woods. With the slight inconvenience of the electricity generator slacking off every once in a while, timing at about 6 to 7 hours in between every crash, and when it does, we'd have to go outside and no matter the time of day to turn it back on, as everything in the house relies on electricity to run. One cold summer night, My girlfriend and I were about to fall asleep, watching some random show on the TV, when the power cut suddenly. Now, one thing I should mention is that right before we'd gotten ready to sleep, we got out just to turn it off and back on, so we don't have to do it in the middle of the night. Frustrated and having no choice but to get up and seek a fix for it, my girlfriend and I walked outside, embraced by the cold dark night, and out to the back of the house where the generator had been. However, from the moment I'd stood facing the sliding glass door and looked out the woods, my heart sank into the floor with an eerie feeling. Somehow, I felt like I was a little bunny, obliviously walking into a poorly prepared trap. But I'd mustered the courage to go outside and be embraced by the dark night. Right as we reached the generator, I'd realized I had forgotten the flashlight while trying to unlock the door, to which my girlfriend suggested I run and fetch it while she waits, which I agreed to, my body craving sleep and the comfort of the house. I ran back on the familiar path, a feeling of dread growing in the pit of my stomach as I neared the house, and right as I faced the massive glass door, I realized why. There was someone, or something, standing right in the center of the living area. It had the features of a stray dog, eyes beaming with red, and foam, what seemed to be leaking from its mouth, as it growled aggressively at me. But it was the farthest thing from being a dog. It was standing on 2 legs, and twice the size of a fairly intimidating man. I froze, my body and exhausted mind teaming up to nail me to the ground as this creature got near me in a zombie-like walk, trying to balance on its own 2 feet. I felt the hairs on my neck rise as it walked closer to me, sniffing the air around me like a starving dog, hungrily waiting for their next meal. The fear rising until it clicked in my head, and something just told me to make a run for it. I ran as fast as I could to get to my girlfriend's, and out of breath, I tried to explain to her why I was so desperate to distance us from the house, before I saw the colors be drained from her face as she stared out into the void behind me. She snatched my arm, and we just ran into the woods, hearing as this creature neared us, feeling as if its paws were seconds from collapsing with my feet. I don't know what I feared most, looking behind and having it devour my face, or freezing out of fear as I did earlier. Choosing not to look around, I shouted to my girlfriend to run back around the house, which was a close distance from where we were. Fueled by the fear and sound of the approaching creature, we ran inside and locked the door as I noticed the beast had stopped at the front gate. Puzzled by its strange behavior, my girlfriend and I failed to take in a second of sleep as we listened carefully to its growling and walking around the property like it was playing some sort of sick game. And somehow, the hours stretched to years as we waited there for the sun to rise. As soon as the sun rose and we noticed the path to the truck was clear, we hightailed it out of that house and promised to never go back there. Although no one really believes the story, as even we don't quite know what we had encountered that night, I suppose the name Dogman rings well on it. So, needless to say, I'm never going back to that place, so I hope I can stay as far away from it as I can.